We're here on this auspicious evening to have a final reading, which is not really when Jacob's leaving, but just the way everything turned out, we're doing a sort of towards the end final reading. So if you knock on the door on Monday morning, he'll still be here. But that's just the way it goes. Thank you to all of you who followed the rule of only silver cars allowed to park along the grass. That was great.
Oh no, mine's brown. Mine's black.
Well, up until at least the last two, we did the silver roll. If we could just pay a little more attention to that next time, that would be good. I think we have some brand new faces. Do we have some people who haven't been here before? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there we go. Well, welcome. This is the Kerouac House, and this is the house where Jack and his mom lived, and you had a little tour. And I'm the chairman, president, whatever, of the board. My name's Janna, and we have about 7 or 8 board members here. Yeah, in fact, our trustee board members come out to almost everything. We plan it, we believe in it, damn it, and we're here, right? And then our old board members can't keep away either. So yeah, if you pick someone and ask them an in-depth question, you've got a 50% chance that they could answer it. So just have at it afterwards. We have 4 residents a year, and we bring them in from all over the country and all over the world, and they write whatever they would like while they're here, even though they apply with a certain type of writing, but they're not required to write. Like if they apply with poems, we don't do a poetry police and come and check that they're actually not writing short fiction or something. Yeah, right, and then we throw them out. So we give them, yeah, I know, you came dangerously close. We give them room and board, and we have 3 missions. Our mission is to preserve this historic home, to host up-and-coming writers of all genres, and then to help our writers go out into the community as much as they would like to and enrich our communities. So that's what we do here. It's pretty simple. No muss, no fuss. And first I have to say, I've done all this to prevent myself from saying Jacob's last name, but it has come to this. I have to say, but I told him I'm going to butcher it like a New Zealander, and Chloe, his partner, is a New Zealander, so it's not going to be a big deal. So Jacob Shores-Agüello, how's that for Spanish? Is here from his latest abode is Waco, Texas, though I doubt he was born and raised there. He wasn't, in fact. He's at Baylor University teaching some classes in poetry, and he came down with Chloe, who, this is the talent duo here, because Chloe was our resident, previous resident here, and when the selection committee was running through all the applications, they didn't make the connection between Jacob and Chloe until well after they had selected Jacob as our up-and-coming poet. So it wasn't bribery or Vegemite or Milo, nothing like that, but we did appreciate it. So Jacob has been writing a mixture of poetry, fiction, essays. He's from Costa Rica and the States, and so his work is sort of trying to come to terms with those two lives that he transitions between. And so he is going to read us something that he's been working on while he's been here, that is an attempt to show how it feels to be bicultural, which I'm very interested in. And he has a book coming out in December, a book of poetry, which also explores these themes. So welcome, Jacob.
Everybody. Hello, everybody. Hello. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to read this off, and I have never done this before, so if I break down, it's because of the electronics, it's not because I'm bad at reading. I'm also bad at reading. So I want to thank everybody for showing up. I want to thank the Kerouac Project especially. I want to thank the people of Orlando. It is a wonderful literary city, and I've been able to do so much here, and it's one of my favorite places. So you should all be proud for multiple reasons. I've been working on some poems, some fiction, some essay. They all are about the same thing. They all kind of work together. I'm not going to actually read a poem, because I'm a poet. That's what poets like to do, not read poems. But I handed one out to you, just so you can kind of get the idea of where this is going. So the story that I'm going to read is the story behind that poem. If you take a glance at the poem, you don't have to read it. The story that I'll read will end with that poem. So layers upon layers kind of thing going on. Okay? Okay. This is about 25 minutes maybe when I read it to myself. I hope it's not going to be a whole lot slower. I just don't know. And I need to adjust the mic if you don't mind.
We need to adjust ourselves. 25 minutes.
Hello. Hello. And I thought once I was done, instead of Q&A, maybe we can just Q&A with wine, Q&A and W, and I'll just go. All right. So by the end of this, hopefully you will learn how to live forever. The beginning part is called How to Live Forever. There are a few things you need to know in order to live forever. Well, maybe not forever. For now, let's say 100 years. That's good, right? That'll feel like enough forever for anyone. At least that's what my grandfather says. At 106, he should know. Any 100-plusser will tell you that anything more might not be worth it. The town he comes from is on a peninsula in Costa Rica that's 4.5 hours from my house here in the coffee-rich Central Valley. His town is full of centenarians, those people who found themselves suddenly in the triple digits. Along with 3 or 4 other places on the planet, it's a place where people routinely live to almost forever. The stats. Around the world, 1 out of 6,000 people live past 100. In the US, it's 120 out of 6,000. That's a pretty good jump. And my grandfather's town, it's 1 out of 4. A full quarter live past 100. So, doing the math, 1 out of 6,000, 120 out of 6,000, and in Marañón, my grandfather's almost on the ocean town, 1,500 souls out of 6,000 live past 100. An astronomical jump. My grandfather is convinced that there's something magic about it, but that's what he'd say. Every story he tells is dripping with magic. He can't tell you a story about going to the grocery without a ghost barging in to break some eggs. He's a storyteller at heart. The family pastime is sitting around on the front porch while he drinks coffee and tries to sell you his incredible stories. And every time you think that the tale is just too impossible, that it must be expertly polished bullshit, he pulls out a little artifact, the black sand that a devil blew in his face, the glass eye that rolled to his feet when he took the haunted ferry across the bay. You hold onto the cold eye, let it roll in your palm, and it pulses with something deeper than story. I have a bag here, in this little room that I'm writing these things to you in. It's leather, pretty old, but nothing special. It's filled with what could charitably call odds and ends, a few objects, things that I got it into my head to hold on to. They aren't nearly as interesting as my grandfather's 100-year-old relics. I've got a set of fingernail clippers, a church bulletin, a toy elephant, a wooden box, a coin, a cell phone. Nothing that the Pope or Indiana Jones would look twice at. But I've been thinking about them lately, and thinking about my grandfather and his stories, and realizing that all of it holds some of the secret of living forever. But let me start again. This isn't really a book about living forever. This is a book about a death. What's one without the other? Chapter 1, fingernail clippers. 20 minutes into the phone call, and I still don't know where my mother's going with it. But I thought I heard the nerves in the back of her throat, how those nerves wobbled her vowels as she spoke. She was a nurse, so when she finally said it, she masked it behind jargon. Doing it this way was a gift for both of us. It bought us both time. But it was cancer, stomach cancer, that unutterable phrase. Still, I didn't react like I thought I would. Shock had severed the bit of my brain that was supposed to panic, and so I told her that everything was all right. I'd come back to Costa Rica and take care of her until she was better, and that would be that. I was saying all this from a creaking house I was renting in Oklahoma. I was in grad school and teaching a class of sophomores how to write poetry. Iambic, I'd say to them, sprung rhythm, half-rhyme, trochaic. It was an existence that seemed suddenly surreal the moment I got the news. My mother was supportive, though, as always, and she insisted that I stay and finish the last month and a half of class. It wasn't an emergency. I'll still be here. We built a little house for ourselves then, out of the lie, out of the belief of her well-being. Everything's all right, no emergency. It felt good to say those words out loud, but part of me understood that it was denial, and that part kept whispering to me, sat like a ghost at the end of my bed as I slept. A few days after the phone call, I found myself online looking how much it would cost to get back to Costa Rica. I told myself I was just investigating, I was just curious, and all my possible routes stacked up, smeared by as I scrolled and scrolled. But no matter how much I looked, the prices vacillated between too expensive and brutally too expensive. I thought I'd have to wait a couple weeks at least, but I kept on clicking. That is where I come into my own, when I can get a hold of something small and work it. Click, click, click. I tried all the unlikely combinations, the remote airports, the red eyes, the mystery airlines, and finally, in the small hours of the night, I found my miracle seat. It was to a small island in the northern part of Panama, very remote, and I had to drop everything just to make it. But technically, I could make it. And once I got to Panama, I could catch a boat and then a bus back to my town in Costa Rica. No, I thought to myself, impossible. I promised myself that I wouldn't do it. I went out into the locust night, breathed in the cool air, and I made myself swear. And that's how, with only a messenger bag stuffed full of student poems and some spare underwear, I found myself, almost without realizing it, on the Costa Rican side of the Shores-Agüello River, second in line for the bus back home. The purple bus was parked mercifully under the 3 almond trees that served as a bus station. I was one of 20 would-be passengers waiting outside, and we made a lazy line, ragged from the heat. We complained about the temperature, complained that the bus was so late in leaving, but there's nothing we could do. Costa Rican weather, Costa Rican buses, neither can be reasoned with. The driver, for his part, was exasperated too. He sat on the bus and checked his cell phone for instructions, constantly adjusting the little fan that snaked from his cigarette lighter. I was standing the line for such a long time that I lost track of everything. So I was surprised when the bus door swung open, not just suddenly, but outward and at me with force. The woman in front of me was caught off guard too. Tall, straight dark hair, outdoorsy clothes. She'd been standing closest to the door when it opened, and so had to jump back to avoid getting smacked. She managed a good hop, but her thick rubber boots complicated the landing, and she lost balance, arms windmilling for a long second in the air. I caught her. Not that I was quick, I've never been quick. Just that the line of people had compressed behind me. It was communal reaction, group gesture, but still, I got the credit for it. And crucially, I got her name. Lola was a graduate student in biology, living in a coastal town and hoping to spend her life studying Costa Rica's frogs. But maybe not, she added. All the frogs that I'm studying are dying. Do you think that's my fault? I'm surprised that I managed to laugh. Well, I said, not all your fault. Lola explained the problems with frogs to me. They are porous-skinned creatures who absorb the environment. No boundary between them and the things that can hurt them. So if the environment is sick, then the frogs are sick. She spoke with her hands, precise motions that graphed the world. Costa Rica is a full and fecund place, teeming with green, with every kind of wing and slither. That's what you hear in school. And my childhood had mostly made good on these promises. The time a dung-smelling tapir had appeared as if by magic from a low-slung cloud. The time I dropped a bowl of cooked Christmas squash and it sprouted into vine almost before my eyes. But now Lola was telling me that Costa Rica was also a place where things go extinct, where they suffer and wither. I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was. The driver hopped off the bus and addressed me and Lola as a unit, a powerful gesture that made us stand closer together. "You two want to put your bags in?" he asked, pointing to a compartment in the belly of the bus. It was filled with boxes, but it looked like there was just enough room for Lola's bag. A big, architecturally sound backpack covered in official patches. "Hale, move it," the driver said as he clapped his hands without an ounce of irony. "Come on, don't you know we're on a schedule here?" Lola carried the big bag over, but before she could load it, a woman started screaming from the back of the line, a piercing voice that stopped everything. "Brutto! Idiota!" The woman yelled as she walked up to us. She was carrying a big gingham pack strapped to her front like a baby, and a robe of a blue dress, an outfit that screamed Madonna and child. But our Virgin hurled decidedly non-biblical insults, and we all kept quiet, eyeing each other, trying to figure out who deserved all these decibels. Eventually, the driver made wide eyes at the woman and gave our game away. Along with the usual expletives, the woman aimed zoological variations at the driver. She called him Pedro. She called him Zopelote. She had colorful ideas as to why he was so vulturous, and she described them in magnificent intestinal detail. The driver had been calm up to then, not saying anything, but the menagerie was too much, and soon he started running over her sentences, telling everyone in line not to listen to her. She was a crazy woman. A mistake. He shouldn't have brought the crowd into it. Now that we were fair game, the woman climbed up to the bottom stair of the bus. This little rusty pulpit only gave her 6 extra inches, but it was more than enough. "Can you believe that we live in a country where a man can knock a woman down?" We could not believe. A country where a man can knock a woman down to the ground and not even help her up. The woman waved Lola over, tried to put an arm around her. She told us that we should feel sorry for Lola. She called her our little girl. But Lola shook off both the arm and the diminutive. She told the woman she hadn't actually fallen. The woman must have seen it wrong. At this, she grew defensive. "So maybe I don't know what he did," she said, her dagger of a finger pointing at the driver. "But believe me, I know him, and I know what he's going to do." Without Lola's corroboration, though, the scene ended. But not before the woman pushed her big bag onto the driver so hard that it read like revenge. The crowd murmured, not quite sure how to feel. As everything settled, I wanted to work out who was the hero and who was the villain. I couldn't let it be messy. Eventually, I recast the woman in my mind, sharp-tongued Mary turning into real, live guardian angel. I asked Lola what it was like to have somebody looking over her, to have somebody always watching. "Horseshit," Lola said. And I genuinely didn't get it. Not when Lola pointed to the woman taking her seat before us, not when she pointed to the big gingham bag tucked into the last bit of space underneath the bus. Too hot on the bus. I helped Lola break her bag down into smaller, more stowable pieces. Mostly it was camping gear, soft things we could easily stuff under chairs and into overhead baskets. But Lola made sure to keep a hold of 2 small black snap-shut cases, and she instructed me to take special care with these sample containers, 6 jelly jars packed full of cotton. I found it strange how nervous the creatures hidden in the cotton made me feel. By the time I'd stowed everything, the bus had filled with people. Mostly it was men returning from contract work. Mostly these men sat at the front of the bus, 1 step farther away from the border town, 1 step closer to their homes in the Central Valley. They took the heat stoically, shirt undone to the second button. But I couldn't deal with the temperature, and so I tried opening windows. Only the woman, the line cutter, had found one that worked. I wondered if this was part of her immaculate deception. Get on first, get the good seat. After I failed with my windows, I resigned to taking a spot in the middle of the bus and undid the top 2 buttons of my shirt. Lola sat next to me, and I continued to be surprised how easily we could talk. We were both Costa Rican, both had piecemeal childhoods split between Central and North America. Lola's father had been a field scientist, expert in the leatherback turtle. My mother had been a traveling nurse, expert in rehabilitation and emergency. The turtles migrated between Massachusetts and Costa Rica looking for food and places to nest. Nurses traveled from Costa Rica to Florida and Oklahoma looking for understaffed hospitals and money to send back home. Did you watch Mr. Rogers or Hotel del Ocho? Was it the Christmas tamal or the Christmas turkey? My childhood had been defined by leaving, of leaving people behind, of people never understanding what it was like to leave. But here was Lola, full name Dolores Ramirez Smith, who seemed to share a past with me, and I thrilled that we were both hyphenated creatures. Those first few hours were good. Lola and I understood how to do the past, but when she started asking future-leaning questions, I felt suddenly sick. I didn't mention the phone call I'd gotten from my mother. I couldn't shape my mouth around the words, and so I shut down. At Puerto, the bus picked up a load of North Americans, most of them fulfilling the Caribbean coast tourist stereotype. Dreadlock blondes clutching surfboards, bahagibagitas, yoga mats, and the bags of beaded jewelry that they hadn't been able to sell on the beach. They tucked themselves at the back of the bus, as far from the rest of the passengers as they could, surfboards crowding the aisle. I was embarrassed that Lola and I had chosen to sit in the exact middle. I played with sleep for hours as we rumbled along. Lola read. Occasionally I opened my eye a crack to stare at the black cat on the cover of her novel. It stared back at me and shamed me for going silent. I told myself that Lola made me feel good and I shouldn't feel good. That's the reason I'd stopped talking. But the cat kept staring back at me, telling me to take a minute, to think things through. Screw you, paper cat, I said under my breath as I rolled over on my other side to sleep. The road to San Jose streaks up the coastline, then takes a hard left, climbs the mountain range that protects the fiddle-shaped valley in the middle of the country. It moves quickly up and out of the tropical and into the clouds themselves, into the land of thick fog, of unexpected pines standing in long, bristly ridges, of switchback passes butting up to vertical drops, into the cloud forest, the Cerros de la Muerte, the mountains of the dead. The chill woke me. I pulled out a cajeta from my bag, a kind of coconut fudge that I bought on the Panamanian side of the border. My mother always told me that rich food was protection against cold, and all around the front half of the bus, it seemed that other mothers had said the same thing. Candy and fried food bloomed from their packaging. Coffee and hot chocolate was shared. Tropical countries have a complex relationship with freeze. Without a yearly winter, without the softening effects of sledding and snowmen, the country has no way to normalize the strangeness of outdoor cold. Costa Ricans know that freeze is the crisis of water. It is change made solid. It is bizarre. The mountains of the dead got their name from the time of the first fincas, when men would guide their coffee-laden oxen to the port, when altitude-chilled wind would settle into the travelers, conspire with the clouds to make ice, and freeze the men solid. No bruise or broken bone, no ribbon of red out the ear. It didn't matter how many times it had actually happened. Now you eat to resist, to keep yourself strong and warm. You eat to prove to yourself that you are a living thing. The inertial force of the curving road kept pushing me into Lola, kept pushing Lola into me. We kissed shoulders, we kissed elbows, and after our third coming together, I couldn't keep silent. I broke the fudge and gave half to her. Lola smiled at the cajeta. She held it close to her nose and breathed in deeply, an expert in the assessment of small things. I marveled at the way she measured the world around her, the way she took time to understand. As we ate the cajeta, a long gorge opened up outside my window, its far side lined with trees. I tried to ignore the dangerous-looking drop and instead concentrated on my food, but I could feel the height, even without looking at it, like some mysterious organ inside of me had grown attuned to verticality and void. Anxiety churned through my body. Bitter flooded my tongue so strongly that I couldn't taste the fudge. Unfortunately, the man across the aisle was curious about the view, and he insisted on standing up to look out my window. "Look at that, just look at that," he said, gesturing with a coffee mug. How many times do you ever get to see the top of a cloud? I looked at the back of the seat in front of me, and time did not pass as the man talked and talked. The bus kept climbing until we were enveloped in a cloud of our own. And Lola talked about how she loved whiteouts. She called the misty streams outside our window peaceful, amniotic. I tried to see it her way, but no matter how lovely and soft I imagined the clouds to be, I couldn't shake the fact that there was a cliff hiding behind all that cotton. The drop kept flashing across my thoughts, my heart kept rising, and Lola kept doing her best to be no help at all. Do you know how easy it is to hallucinate? She asked, and the bizarre question threw me. She leaned over to look out my window. I tried to focus on the closeness of one body crossing over another. The brain needs stimulation, she said, a constant flow of light and sound, and if it doesn't get it, it invents it, just like that. She snapped her fingers and sat back down. I couldn't quite process all of what she was saying, but the part I understood made things worse. Lola kept going. I'll walk in that cloud for 20 minutes, tops, that's all it would take. All these people come to Costa Rica, gesturing to the back of the bus, for an experience. But you don't see them walking out there in the cold, do you? All that loss of sensory information. She said these last words lovingly. Lola continued to make arguments about the transformative nature of clouds. My brain bounced between my mother and the driver, my mother and the cliff, my mother and the absence of all things. My heart beat faster, and I was scared how not me it was, how musical and bassy it had become. When my right thumb started jumping around on its own, I excused myself so I could walk up the aisle. Maybe walking would get me back in my body. Maybe if I saw the driver, capable and definitely not hallucinating, then I could wrap my panic back up in its little box. At the very least, it'd help if I could see just a little more of the road. But the bus's headlights were not strong enough. The light bounced off the cloud, washed away the last of the detail. No wisp or contrail. The windshield held more absence than anything I've ever seen. My first reaction was plain fear, to hurry back to my seat, but I stayed. Caught somewhere between fight and flight, I dared myself to stare into the blank windshield. I don't know what I was hoping for, but Lola's hallucinatory promise kept knocking around my thoughts. I wanted to look my brain in the eye, and so I stared. Nothing happened after 30 seconds. After 1 minute, nothing. 2, nothing. But 3 minutes in, my skin began to tingle. Blood rushed to my head, and I couldn't believe it. But I swear I felt like I was falling. It only took a second for me to understand that I wasn't the only one. The bus had crested the peak and was now going downhill, eating up the incline. Disappointed with my white experiment and feeling foolish, I started to go back, holding onto the seats for balance as the bus shuddered with its new gravity-fed speed. When the bus hit a pothole, it skipped into the air and we all let out an audible shock. I sat down and hoped that Lola couldn't see that I was shaking. I closed my eyes and negotiated with myself. It was okay for a tourist to be scared, but I'd taken this road so many times, right? And I was still a Costa Rican, right? My mother's sickness hadn't changed that, right? I dug into my bag for another cajeta, for anything. Eventually, a tourist woman worked her way up to the driver. Her anger contrasted with her sarong's meditative print. She spoke to the driver in English, demanded that he slow down. Then she spoke to him in dollars. But his only reaction was to tap a small clock on the dash. The man across the aisle found this funny and joked that we had the only bus driver in all of Costa Rica who cared about being on time. But one good thing came from all of this. Lola looked at me, eyes wide, and we gripped on each other's knees. Finally, my heart was free to beat out its reggaeton. White, white, red. I didn't understand why the bus was filling with rhythmic red light until I saw the ambulance pull along our left-hand side. Its loudspeaker warned of disaster, offered escort. Its enormous light rack burned up the cloud. And I have to tell you, the clarity was beautiful. The return of the green was beautiful. And when the driver adjusted to the center of the lane, the cliff was beautiful too. We passengers passed coffee and food, now a celebration, from the front of the bus to the back, from the back to the front. The scrape with death, the shared meal, that's all it took for the passengers to come together as a whole. But not me. My 3 white minutes had done something after all. I realized that I'd gotten used to looking. Anxiety melted. Time slowed. I stood up at my seat and looked at the driver. I was the only one who saw his tailgating of the ambulance, his glances at the clock, his fingers fluttering over the gear shift. And as the bus blossomed into overdrive and began to pass the ambulance on the left-hand side, I was the only one who did not gasp. Instead, I practiced measuring things. I measured the distance between the clock and the driver's eye. I measured the distance between the road and the bottom of the gorge. I measured the distance between my body and the things that can hurt me, between the inevitable and the unseeable, between belief and lie. I measured the distance between green and white, between Central and North America, between future and past. Finally, I measured the distance between looking at things and looking away, between what my mother had said to me and what I had heard. It isn't an emergency. I'll still be here. The passengers erupted, split themselves between prayers and outrage as the bus sped on. Dios míos harmonized with go to hells. The man with a coffee tumbler cursed at the driver. Hijo de puta, he said. Pinche idiota, bruto. And with those words, a wave of recollection washed across us passengers. Some of our eyes searched for her, the woman who said that she knew what the driver was going to do, the woman with the gingham bag, the woman in blue. She met our eyes like she'd been waiting for us the whole time. She walked the aisle to the front of the bus and did not stumble from the speed. I measured that distance too. Can you believe, she began, and the bus could and could not believe. The bus arrived in the orchid heat. It took too long to get Lola's things together, and by the time we'd gotten her off the bus, she had to run and catch the last taxi, her face framed in its window as it pulled away. I thought it was going to be more than that everything we had in common would hold us together for a little while longer, that somehow a relationship with Lola would be the thing that saved me. It was a selfish thought, I know. She was just a woman I met on the bus. She owed me nothing. The woman in blue was the only one who did not try to leave the dusty parking lot. Instead, she sat down on a bench next to her tremendous bag and ate an ice cream from who knows where. So you're losing her, she said when I stepped off the bus. Me? No, I mean, we just met. No, you're losing her, she said, moving her bag and patting the bench so I'd sit down. She asked me questions that I couldn't fully answer. Everything I said sprouted a tale of doubt. I'm moving back to Costa Rica, I think. I just quit my job, I think. The woman said, not paying attention. She focused on my little leather satchel and had me show her what was in it. I opened it up and she wondered how far I'd get with just underwear and poems. She wanted to know how I could travel anywhere, let alone from one country to another with so little. I defended myself, told her that it had been a last-minute flight and I had to run and I had to grade all these papers, and I caught myself not making any sense. Of course, I could have packed a proper bag. I realized that I wanted it to happen this way, for it to be extreme. I needed to know that I was going all in, that this was important, that this was emergency. The woman was proud of her big bag, proud of how life had taught her to be prepared. She started pulling things out to show me. 2 cell phones she bought in the Canal Zone to sell in the city, a small black umbrella with a braided leather handle, an old tape recorder with a big red button, something wrapped in tinfoil. Chicken, she explained. My cousins love it. I thought about my own family, how there would be other people at the house, other people flailing with the news, and it struck me how empty-handed I was. Here you go, the woman in blue said, handing me a small metal fingernail clipper that glinted in the sun. I held on to the little gift, and tears found their way into my eyes. What's it for? It's for fingernails. No, I mean, why are you giving it to me? A place to start, she said, laughing. Something to put in that sad little bag of yours. I sat with a woman in blue for a long time. I thought about asking her exactly what she'd whispered to the driver to get him to slow down. Slowing the unslowable, it seemed like something that I need to know. But I didn't ask. Instead, I watched a procession of hyacinth macaws glide high above the valley. I played with the clippers she'd given me, worked its little mechanism. Eventually, I talked about the future some. Eventually, I talked about my mother some. And the birds' ashy shadows drew crosses onto both of our heads.
Thank you.